My parents demanded $50,000 for their business, called me selfish for refusing. Then, when I finally gave it, they abandoned me, so I planned a 7-year revenge that destroyed their lives. This is going to be long, so grab some popcorn. I'm 28 now, but this story really begins when I was about 12. My parents, Frank and Linda, decided I was old enough to contribute to the household. What that really meant was I became their personal servant and piggy bank. Every birthday from age 12 onwards, they'd forget until the last minute, then give me some excuse about money being tight. But somehow, they always had money for their weekend getaways or Linda's shopping sprees. When I turned 16 and got my first job at a grocery store, they immediately demanded rent, $300 a month from my $800 paycheck. The house chores were endless. While my friends played video games, I was doing laundry, cleaning bathrooms, mowing lawns, and cooking dinner most nights. Linda would sit watching TV while I scrubbed floors. If I complained, I'd get lectures about family responsibility and how ungrateful I was. College was a nightmare. They promised to help with tuition, then at the last minute said they couldn't afford it. I had to take massive student loans while watching them book a cruise that same month. When I graduated and got a job making $45,000, they were suddenly very interested in my finances again. At 22, I was living in a tiny studio apartment, paying back student loans, trying to build some kind of life. That's when Frank and Linda made their big announcement. They were retiring early at 55 because they were tired of the rat race. What savings, you ask? Great question. Turns out they'd blown through most of their retirement money on trips, a new car, and Linda's online shopping addiction. But somehow, this was my problem to solve. They moved into a nicer apartment than mine and started expecting $800 a month from me. When I said I couldn't afford it, Linda cried about how they'd sacrificed everything for me, and Frank called me selfish. The guilt trips were masterful. I gave in. Like an idiot, I gave in. For 3 years, I lived like a monk. No social life, no dating, ramen noodles for dinner most nights. I was 25 and had never had a serious relationship because I couldn't afford to take anyone out, couldn't afford a decent place, couldn't afford anything resembling a normal life. I watched friends get engaged, buy houses, start families, while I was trapped working to support my parents' lifestyle. Every time I tried to reduce what I gave them, they'd manufacture some crisis that required more money. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Frank called me at work, sounding more excited than I'd heard him in years. "Son, we've got the opportunity of a lifetime," he said. "Linda and I want to open a small cafe. We've found the perfect spot, and we've got it all figured out. The thing is, we need $50,000 to get started. We were thinking you could help us out." $50,000. I made $48,000 a year. After taxes, student loans, rent, and the money I was already giving them, I was barely scraping by. "Dad, I don't have that kind of money," I said. "Well, you could get a loan," Linda chimed in. "You've got good credit, right? Think of it as an investment in our family's future." What followed was 6 months of the most intense emotional manipulation I've ever experienced. They called it their business plan presentations, but it was really elaborate guilt-tripping sessions. Linda would show up at my apartment with printouts about how family businesses were the backbone of America. Frank would talk about how this was their last chance to make something of themselves. They'd alternate between praise and punishment. One day I was their smart, successful son. The next day I was selfish and ungrateful for not immediately emptying my bank account for them. The emotional manipulation got darker. Linda started talking about how she was getting old and didn't have many years left. Frank would mention how his friends' kids were all successful and helping their parents, unlike me. Every family gathering became an interrogation about the loan. Every phone call ended with hints about the business. They'd send me articles about successful cafes, anything to keep the pressure on. After 6 months of relentless pressure, I was emotionally exhausted. I wasn't sleeping well, I was anxious all the time, and I'd started having panic attacks. The final straw came at a Sunday dinner. They'd invited my Uncle Tom and his family. Throughout dinner, they kept steering the conversation toward family support. My cousin Mike mentioned helping his parents renovate their kitchen, and Frank immediately jumped in. "That's what family does," he said, looking directly at me. "Some people get that, others—" He let the sentence hang there. Linda started tearing up. "I just don't understand what we did wrong. We raised him right, and now when we need help with one thing, one chance to build something for our future, he acts like we're asking him to rob a bank." My 8-year-old cousin asked innocently, "Why won't you help Aunt Linda and Uncle Frank?" That's when something inside me broke. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll get you the money." Getting $50,000 when you make $48,000 a year isn't easy, but I was determined, or maybe broken enough, to make it happen. First, I took out a $30,000 personal loan at 12% interest. Next, I liquidated everything, my small 401k, with massive penalties, my savings, my emergency fund. That got me another $8,000. I picked up a second job working nights at a warehouse. 4 hours of sleep a night, but it brought in an extra $1,200 a month. I moved out of my studio into a basement room barely bigger than a closet. I stopped eating out entirely. Breakfast was instant oatmeal, lunch was a peanut butter sandwich, dinner was pasta or rice. I lost 25 pounds in 2 months. I canceled everything, phone plan, car insurance. I sold my car and took the bus everywhere. It took me 8 months of living like this to save the full $50,000. 8 months of feeling like a zombie, of having no life outside work and sleep, of watching my health deteriorate. I looked like hell. Dark circles, clothes hanging loose, hands shaking from exhaustion. But I had their money. I called Frank on a Friday to tell him I had the money. He seemed surprised it had taken so long. "About time," he said. "We were starting to think you'd changed your mind. Can you come over Sunday with the check?" Sunday arrived, and I drove to their apartment with a cashier's check for $50,000. I was actually excited, despite everything. I thought this would finally be the moment they'd appreciate what I'd done, acknowledge my sacrifice, maybe even thank me. I was so incredibly naive. Linda answered the door looking annoyed. "You're late," she said. "We said 2 p.m., it's 2:15. I followed her into the living room where Frank was watching TV. "So, you finally came through," he said without looking away from the screen. "Let's see it." I handed him the check. He glanced at it, folded it, and put it in his wallet. That was it. No thank you. No acknowledgement. No excitement. "This took way too long," Linda said, arms crossed. "We found that location 8 months ago. We've been telling people we were opening a cafe, and we've looked like idiots waiting for you to get your act together." I stood there, stunned. I had to work extra jobs, sell everything I owned. I've been living on rice and pasta for months. Frank finally looked at me with disgust. "That's what people do when they want something. You think we didn't make sacrifices when you were growing up? We did what we had to do, and now you finally did what you had to do. Congratulations on being a functional adult." Linda nodded. "Honestly, we're disappointed it took you this long. Other people's kids would have found a way immediately. We raised you to be better than this." I felt like I'd been slapped. "I gave you $50,000. "You gave us what you owed us," Frank replied. "After all the money we spent raising you, this is the least you could do." They started discussing their business plans, completely dismissing me. Finally, Linda looked at me again. "Was there something else?" "We have things to do." I left. I sat in their parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to process what had happened. Then I broke down completely. I cried harder than I had since I was a child. That's when something fundamental shifted inside me. All the years of guilt, manipulation, sacrifice, it crystallized into something cold and clear. They had made a huge mistake. Driving home, memories kept flooding back. I remembered being 7, watching other kids get picked up on their birthdays while I waited alone because mine had forgotten. I remembered every birthday they'd ruined, every achievement they'd minimized, every time they'd made me feel guilty for existing. I realized something that should have been obvious. They didn't love me. Not really. They loved what I could do for them, what I could provide. But me, as a person, I was just a resource to be exploited. The fog of guilt that had clouded my judgment for years finally lifted, and I saw them clearly. They were parasites, and I was done being their host. I didn't rush into revenge. That would have been stupid and ultimately unsatisfying. Instead, I did what I'd always been good at. I planned meticulously. First, I had to stabilize my own life. I kept the warehouse job for 8 more months to aggressively pay down the debt I'd accumulated. I found a better apartment and started taking care of my health again. Proper meals, exercise, sleep. More importantly, I began investing in myself in ways I'd never been able to before. I enrolled in night classes for my CPA certification while working full-time. I learned Spanish and Mandarin to make myself invaluable in the job market. I started networking ruthlessly within my industry, attending every conference and mixer I could afford. Within a year, I'd landed a position at a larger firm making $65,000. But I wasn't done climbing. I took on every challenging project, worked weekends voluntarily, and made myself indispensable. Within 2 years, I was making $78,000. By year 3, I'd been promoted to senior accountant, making $92,000. All this time, I maintained the exact same relationship with my parents. I still gave them money, though I gradually reduced it from $800 to $500, then to $400 a month, claiming my own expenses had increased with my better lifestyle. They grumbled, but accepted it. I still visited for holidays, still played the role of the dutiful, if somewhat disappointing son. But I was watching everything, and planning everything. Their cafe, Frank and Linda's Corner Cup, opened 6 months after I'd given them the money. And here's what infuriated me most. It was actually successful. They'd lucked into a great location near the community college, and Linda, despite her many character flaws, did have a decent eye for creating cozy atmosphere. Frank, for all his laziness at home, actually proved competent at managing suppliers and inventory. Within 18 months, they were turning a solid profit of about $8,000 per month. Within 2 years, they'd paid off their initial equipment loans and were banking serious money. They bought matching BMW sedans, took a 3-week vacation to Europe, started talking about opening a second location in the next town over. They were living their dream, funded entirely by my sacrifice, and I was still driving a 10-year-old Honda and shopping at discount grocery stores. But I was patient, because I was systematically learning everything about their business, their finances, their suppliers, their landlord, their employees, their customers, their peak hours, their profit margins, their business license requirements, their health department inspection schedules, everything. I also started building relationships with people in their orbit. I'd stop by the cafe occasionally, always friendly, always the proud son showing off his parents' success to my work colleagues. I'd chat with their employees, their regular customers, even their suppliers when I encountered them during deliveries. Most importantly, I was building my war chest and my network of resources for what was coming. By year 4, I'd saved enough to start making serious moves. My first target was their foundation, literally. I needed to control their lease. The strip mall where their cafe was located was owned by Westfield Properties, which was actually just 3 middle-aged guys who'd bought it as an investment 15 years earlier. Through my expanding network of business contacts, I learned that 2 of the original partners were getting divorced and needed cash quickly to settle their asset divisions. It took me 10 months of careful negotiations, using a lawyer friend who owed me favors from helping his accounting firm land a major client. I structured the deal through an LLC I'd created called Summit Commercial Holdings, so my name never appeared on any paperwork my parents might see. I bought out both partners for $340,000, every penny I'd saved plus a commercial loan I qualified for, thanks to my improved income and credit score. This made me a 67% majority owner of Westfield Properties. The remaining partner, Robert Chen, was an older gentleman who was thrilled to have a younger, more active partner and readily agreed to let me handle day-to-day management decisions. This was crucial because it meant I was now my parents' landlord. They had no idea, of course. All their interactions were still with Pinnacle Property Management, the company we contracted to handle tenant relations. But every lease decision, every rent increase, every maintenance issue, every new policy was ultimately under my control. But here's the beautiful part. For the first 18 months, I was a model landlord. I actually improved their situation. I kept their rent exactly the same while raising it for other tenants. I upgraded the parking lot lighting, improved the landscaping, and even subsidized a new shared dumpster system that reduced everyone's waste management costs. I wanted them to get comfortable. I wanted them to expand. I wanted their business to thrive and grow, because the higher they climbed, the further they'd have to fall. While playing the perfect landlord, I was simultaneously working on gaining influence over every other aspect of their business ecosystem. The supplier web. Through a series of shell companies and strategic partnerships, I began acquiring small stakes in or influence over several of their key vendors. I partnered with a business acquaintance to buy a 30% stake in their coffee supplier, Columbia Coffee Distributors. I helped finance a friend's acquisition of their main food distributor's biggest competitor, then orchestrated situations where their original supplier would lose key contracts and need to raise prices to stay afloat. The Employee Intelligence Network. I cultivated relationships with all their staff. I'd stop by the cafe every couple weeks, always during different shifts, always friendly and chatty. I learned that Maria, their best barista, was struggling to pay for night school. I discovered that Tom, their part-time cook, was frustrated because Frank had promised him full-time hours 6 months ago, but kept putting it off. I found out that Sarah, their newest hire, was actually overqualified and looking for management experience they weren't providing. The regulatory angle. Through my work as a CPA, I'd developed relationships with several city inspectors and health department officials. Not corrupt relationships, just professional friendships built on mutual respect and the occasional referral. I learned the inspection schedules, the common violation patterns, and most importantly, I started tracking every minor infraction at my parents' cafe. The community connections. I joined the local Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Business Association. I started attending city council meetings. I volunteered for local charity events. I was building a reputation as a civic-minded young professional who cared about local business development. The financial surveillance. Most importantly, I was tracking every detail of their financial situation. Through my professional network, I had connections at their bank, their insurance company, and their equipment leasing companies. I knew their cash flow patterns, their seasonal fluctuations, their debt obligations, and their profit margins down to the dollar. I discovered they were actually more successful than they'd admitted to anyone, including me when they'd been begging for money. They were clearing almost $12,000 per month in profit and had built up a business account with nearly $85,000 in it. This knowledge filled me with a cold rage, but it also gave me the final piece I needed for my plan. Year 6 was when I started executing the destruction phase, but so gradually and professionally that every single move looked like normal business operations or bad luck. The rent strategy. First, I implemented a market analysis rent adjustment for the entire strip mall. I hired a legitimate commercial real estate appraisal company to assess all the properties. Their report recommended rent increases of 12 to 15% across all units to bring them in line with current market rates. But I implemented these selectively. The insurance office and hair salon got 8% increases. The cell phone repair shop got 10%. My parents got 18%, structured as a phased increase, 12% immediately, then an additional 6% 6 months later. The supplier squeeze. Columbia Coffee distributors began having inventory management issues that resulted in delayed deliveries and occasional substitutions of premium blends with lower quality alternatives. Their food distributor started requiring larger minimum orders and implementing delivery fees. Their equipment maintenance company was acquired by a larger firm, and suddenly their service quality declined, while prices increased by 25%. Each individual issue was annoying but explainable. Together, they were death by 1,000 cuts. The regulatory pressure. I started providing anonymous tips to the health department and city inspectors about minor violations. Everything I reported was factually accurate. Instead of occasional random inspections, my parents' cafe started getting visited every 6 to 8 weeks. Each inspection found minor violations that required corrective action and follow-up visits. The staffing crisis. This is where my relationships with their employees became crucial. When Maria had to quit to focus on school, I arranged for her to get a part-time job at a law firm where I'd done consulting work. When Tom got frustrated about the management position he'd been promised, a friend of mine who owned a restaurant across town called him about an assistant manager opening. Sarah got introduced to a client of mine who was opening a boutique hotel and needed someone to manage their cafe operation. Within 6 weeks, my parents had lost their 3 best employees during their busy season and were scrambling with inexperienced replacements while dealing with decreased service quality and customer complaints. The insurance accident. I arranged for a minor water leak from an upstairs pipe that caused water damage to their ceiling and ruined about $3,000 worth of inventory. The insurance claim got tangled up in bureaucracy for 6 weeks, during which they operated with visible water damage that looked unprofessional. The fake competition. I started spreading rumors that a major coffee chain was scouting locations near the community college. This wasn't true, but the rumor spread quickly. My parents began making desperate moves, cutting prices, extending hours, spending money on advertising they couldn't afford. The health scare. I arranged for a regular customer to report food poisoning after eating at their cafe. The person was never actually sick, but they called the health department, triggering an immediate inspection. The cafe was cleared of wrongdoing, but word spread through the community, and their daily revenue dropped by about 15%. By this time, Frank and Linda were paranoid, exhausted, and starting to turn on each other. I'd hear them arguing when I'd visit other shops in the strip mall. They started making poor decisions driven by stress and fear, essentially sabotaging themselves. By year 7, their profit margins had shrunk from $12,000 per month to barely $3,000. They were working 70-hour weeks and had burned through most of their savings. The fake buyout offer. I had a lawyer friend approach them with an offer from an interested investor to buy their business for $180,000, well below what they thought it was worth. This got them thinking about exit strategies and made them realize how much value they'd lost. The property sale illusion. Through complex legal maneuvers involving multiple LLCs, I arranged for Westfield Properties to be sold to Sterling Commercial Management, another company I controlled. Sterling immediately sent notices announcing rent increases of 22% effective in 60 days, new lease terms requiring 5-year commitments with personal guarantees, mandatory facade improvements costing each tenant approximately $8,000, new common area maintenance fees, stricter operating restrictions. For my parents, Operating on razor-thin margins, these changes were impossible. The credit squeeze. I used my banking connections to ensure that when my parents applied for emergency loans, they faced maximum scrutiny. Applications weren't rejected but were delayed, required additional documentation, and ultimately approved for amounts far smaller than needed at interest rates they couldn't afford. Exactly as I'd predicted, 3 weeks after receiving the sterling notices, they called me in complete panic. "Danny, we need your help," Linda said, her voice shaking. "The cafe is in serious trouble. Our rent is going up by over $2,000 a month. They want us to sign a 5-year lease, and we need to pay for all these improvements. We need $40,000, and we need it now." "I'm sorry," I said, using the same calm tone I'd perfected over the years. "I just don't have that kind of money available right now. I'm in the middle of closing on a house, and all my savings are tied up." This was technically true. I was buying a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that would have been impossible to afford back when I was supporting them. The conversation that followed was exactly what I'd expected. Accusations, guilt trips, threats, tears. They brought up every manipulation tactic from the past 7 years, but I'd heard it all before. I'd become immune. "I understand you're frustrated," I said finally. "But I learned a long time ago that I can't sacrifice my own financial security for other people's business decisions. I'm sure you'll figure something out." Unable to meet Sterling's demands, they tried everything. They looked for alternative locations but couldn't afford moving costs. They tried to sell but received only insulting lowball offers. They considered bankruptcy but faced personal liability for lease guarantees. Finally, they made the decision I'd been waiting 7 years for. They gave up. Frank and Linda's Corner Cup closed permanently on a rainy Tuesday in March. They'd fallen 4 months behind on rent, their equipment was repossessed, and they owed money to virtually every supplier in town. The dream I'd sacrificed everything to fund was officially dead. But I wasn't finished. I had the perfect tenant in mind. Jessica Rodriguez was a 26-year-old pastry chef I'd met at a Chamber of Commerce mixer 2 years earlier. She had incredible talent and business acumen, had been saving for 4 years to open her own bakery cafe, and had $28,000, but was still $18,000 short of her goal. When my parents' cafe closed, I waited exactly 1 month before having Sterling reach out to Jessica. I offered her the space at $2,400 per month, $800 less than my parents had been paying. 3-year lease with renewal options, no first and last month's rent required. I sold her all of my parents' repossessed equipment for $12,000, about 30% of its value. Finally, I offered to personally invest $25,000 in her business for a 15% equity stake. Jessica literally started crying during our meeting. "I can't believe this is happening. I've been working toward this dream for so long, but I never thought anyone would take a chance on me." The irony was perfect. The space my parents had lost through arrogance and entitlement was going to someone who truly deserved it. Through my connections, I also arranged for Jessica to hire Maria, Tom, and Sarah, my parents' former employees, who became the foundation of Jessica's success. Jessica's triumph, everything my parents should have been. Jessica's bakery and cafe opened on a sunny Saturday morning in September, in the exact same space where my parents' dreams had died. Where my parents had served mediocre coffee and pre-made pastries with grudging customer service, Jessica created artisanal masterpieces from scratch every morning. Her croissants were buttery perfection, her specialty coffee drinks were crafted with precision, her lunch menu featured fresh, locally sourced ingredients. More importantly, Jessica treated every customer like they were the most important person in her day. She remembered names, asked about families, celebrated birthdays. She created the warm, welcoming community space my parents had pretended to want, but never delivered. The results were extraordinary. Within 2 weeks, regular morning lines of 15 to 20 people, within a month, featured in the local newspaper, within 3 months, averaging 300 customers per day, within 6 months, monthly 300 customers per day, profit of $18,000, more than my parents ever achieved. Within a year, paid off equipment loans, built 6-month operating reserve, planning catering expansion. The community embraced her in ways they'd never embraced my parents. The community college held study groups there. Local business organizations moved their meetings to Jessica's. She became a hub of positive activity and genuine community connection. The difference was stark. Jessica succeeded because she cared about excellence and serving others. My parents had failed because they only cared about money and status, expecting success without earning it. About 8 months after Jessica opened, I was having my usual Saturday coffee when my parents walked in. They looked worn down, dressed shabbily, clearly struggling since their business failed. They didn't notice me at first, but I could hear their conversation. "I can't believe someone else is making this work," Linda said bitterly. "We had the same location, same opportunity. It's not fair." "The new owners probably gave them a sweetheart deal," Frank replied. "Some people get all the breaks. We never had anyone willing to help us succeed." I almost choked on my coffee. The lack of self-awareness was stunning. When Linda noticed me, I stood up and walked over. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I come here regularly. It's a great place." "Well, isn't that nice?" Frank said sarcastically. "Glad to see you're supporting local businesses. Too bad you couldn't do the same for your own family." The irony was perfect. "Actually," I said, "I am supporting family. Jessica is like family to me now." I called Jessica over. "Jessica, I'd like you to meet my parents. Mom, Dad, this is Jessica, the owner. She's also my business partner." Their faces went white. "I'm one of Jessica's investors," I continued. "I helped her get started, and I'm also her landlord. This building, I own it. I own the whole strip mall, actually." Frank's face turned red. "You knew we were struggling, and you didn't help us?" "I offered the same opportunities to everyone. Some people rise to the challenge, others don't. Jessica worked 2 jobs while saving money. She researched her market, perfected her recipes, treated every customer like gold. That's why she's successful." "You could have helped us," Linda cried. "You're our son." "I did help you. I gave you $50,000, remember? What you did with that help was up to you." Linda pointed at me accusingly. "Our son sabotaged us." Now I was genuinely angry. "Let me tell you what really happened, Jessica. These people raised me to be their personal ATM. From age 12, I worked to support their lifestyle. When they decided they wanted a business, they manipulated me for months until I gave them $50,000. Money I destroyed my health and financial stability to save." Jessica's eyes widened. "And when I finally gave them that money, after working 2 jobs and living on rice for 8 months, you know what they said? They said I took too long. They said I should be ashamed. They said it was the least I could do." I turned back to my parents. "You want to know why your business failed? It wasn't rent increases or bad luck. It failed because you've never worked for anything. You expected success to be handed to you, just like you expected me to hand you everything else." Jessica built this business with her own hands, dedication, and appreciation. That's the difference between success and failure. Frank was sputtering. Linda was crying angry tears. "You planned this," she said. "You've been planning this for years." "You're absolutely right. I've been planning this for 5 years. 5 years of watching you enjoy the fruits of my sacrifice while never showing gratitude. But here's the thing. I didn't destroy your business. You did that yourselves, with your entitlement and poor work ethic. I just stopped enabling you." My parents left that day, and I haven't spoken to them since. I heard through my uncle that they're both working retail jobs now, living in a small apartment, struggling to make ends meet. Do I feel bad? Sometimes. They're still my parents, and there's a part of me that wishes things could have been different. But then I remember that day when I gave them everything I had, and they responded with anger and disappointment. I remember all the years of manipulation, guilt, and emotional abuse. I remember how they treated me like a resource instead of a son. Jessica's business is thriving. She's expanded her hours, hired more staff, and is looking at opening a second location. She sends me photos of her latest creations and always asks about my day when I stop by. She treats me with more respect and gratitude than my own parents ever did. I'm dating someone now, a wonderful woman named Sarah who I met through Jessica's cafe. We're talking about moving in together, maybe getting married someday. For the first time in my life, I'm able to think about my own future instead of constantly worrying about supporting my parents. Was my revenge justified? I'll let you decide. All I know is that I'm finally free, and I'm finally happy. And sometimes, that's justice enough. Update. For those asking, yes, Jessica knows the full story now. She was shocked at first, but she said it makes her even more grateful for the opportunity I gave her. She's like the sister I never had, and her success is the best revenge I could have asked for.